who of course, as we know, have been such long associates of Souza as well. But here, of course, Indrajit and Prinseps are partners for this show, and I do have to sort of congratulate and thank them for all the research and the effort that they've put in. I think there are fair amount of fresh perspectives that the show brings, a lot of narratives that we've sort of known or believed in, and I think a lot of research has gone in to put this show together. Of course, it's an ongoing process, and I'm sure eventually, as we keep uh, deriving the research further and as we keep moving on, we can put the pictures in context and we can put the artworks more in context and probably make this an even larger exhibition. But yeah, I do think still it was an ambitious project which they've all put together pretty well. I think once Indrajit speaks, he can specifically thank the team members who he might know better. Of course, Yashodhara ji, who is of course our go-to person at Dhoomimal, and I think she's been this foremost bearer of knowledge on progressives, which she's always felt happy to share. And I think Souza has been a very important part of the art movement in India always, and it's someone who's impacted. You know, like there are people who might like him, there are people who might not like him, but I think there's no one who's not impacted by him. His works have always sort of impacted everyone in a strong manner. And then, of course, we're extremely honored to have Keren and Solomon. In fact, I've always seen this picture of theirs for the retrospective show that probably they visited at the gallery, which was almost, yeah, I think it was late 90s or early 2000s.
I think it was Memorial.
It was
Yeah, it was 2002, I think, just after Souza passed away. So yeah, I think 23. Yes, he does look quite small in the picture. So, so I think we'll just sort of start our conversations, and Yashodhara ji would you can please ask, start the conversation, or
I'll say a quick word. Firstly, obviously the exhibition was somewhat an ambitious goal, and in ambitious and lofty goals, of course, you need the right partners. And first and foremost, I would like to thank Dhoomimal for that. I mean, they were one of the original gallerists. They are for Souza, and without Dhoomimal's help, this would not have been possible. Of course, part of this is also, I mean, the title of the show is Souza Continuum, and the Continuum comes from Keren and Solomon, the two next generations who are sitting here. We had started to chat with Keren ages ago, and of course, she's a wealth of information. And that kind of led us to the belief that there is a lot of things about Souza that were not quite accurately depicted early on. Even I, as a collector of Souza, had made some mistakes because of the narratives that were in play. So that began the quest for this very detailed research and thinking. And we hope that I'm not going to take the fun away from the tour. We hope that we realize the rigor and depth of Souza's influences and why he painted what. That's been the goal, and of course, in doing so, we've identified a few more things that should have been added. So hopefully, this is an expanding show, and hopefully, Dhoomimal and Keren or Solomon are all around to help in the show. And again, thanks to everybody, and thank you for your show. I mean, the book 99 on the Progressives is the seminal book on for a bunch of these artists, and thank you very much for that. Thank you for coming. Yes, we can start with some questions.
yeah, and yeah, do you have specific questions?
Well, I'll just stand and ask then. So one of the things that we heard about Souza was the whole title that he's been given, Enfant terrible. I mean, like, which translated literally means terrible child, but there are a bunch of other meanings, and of course, one of them saying it means is about him being an avant-garde artist, about him experimenting. But while he was an avant-garde and experimented a lot, but there are other artists in India also who are experimented a lot. So is it that, his depiction of the female figure in grotesque form, is that what makes him awful, terrible? Or what, where is the cliche or the moniker come from? I mean, why is he called the awful, terrible of Indian art? And maybe I'll start this question with Yashodhara.
Thank you. I think he was the author theory of Indian art, but in a specific sense, he questioned the, with his devilish heads, his starkly nude and but sensual women, and his toppling landscapes. He questioned the power and corruption inherent in the establishment, and uh, this is the thing actually I want to ask Karen. He was someone who, of course, was post the Second World War, but he saw that the upper classes were full of all kinds of decadence, and he felt that the war itself had brought it out, and that it was a valuable lesson which we needed to carry further. So this enfant terrible, which is known for, was a way of carrying forward in a very constructive way. Now, his best years actually were what is known as the bell-sized years, when he went to London in 1948 at 48, yeah, and he met his second wife, who was a Czech refugee uh, in London, and they immediately hit it off, Liz a lot, and he was staying in her house in Belsize Park, and his best works actually came out in this period. The very strong dynamic strokes which etched out these faces. Uh, these were faces without foreheads, eyes in eyes replaced the forehead, uh, gnashing mouth, and kind of a sizzling kind of demeanor. These faces are devilish, but they question. They question. This is something which was very special to Souza, and in the process, he created a language for modern Indian art. So these are very special years, the Belsize Park years, when he lived with Karen's mother and had three daughters. I think Karen, you were the eldest, right? So one values it and cherishes it, and feels that if it hadn't been for Souza, maybe modern Indian art wouldn't have taken the path that it did. Uh, Now, I'd like to ask Karen whether you grew up in an artistic environment where your mother was an actor and your father was a very well-known artist. What was it like? What were your memories of that period, of your growing up years? Okay, one more thing. And Karen helped Souza paint. She used to help him with his canvases, priming the canvas, holding it up. These years were very special, Karen. What was it like, your memories?
I have like very, very gorgeous memories. To be honest, I can't really compare them with anything else. That was the experience I had. So for me, it was normal that I lived in a home rich with creativity, a backdrop of classical music always, and my father's he was either seriously painting or he was up to his antics, because he loved to play with us and play his mouth organ and dance, and he also loved to jog us on his knees and say, "Look over there," and then open his knees up, and then we fall through. I think he loved that more than we did, practically. Well, we all loved it, and he used to love to throw us onto the bed. Like, he was very, very, very playful, and I think that, just going back to the Enfant terrible, he was extremely playful. He had a fantastic sense of humour. And so I think that's also very, very, very much a part of it. And yeah, like I think more will come out as the conversation develops.
It was like he maintained his childlike
Very,
nature.
very much so. Yeah, very.
He
much so.
maintained it.
Yeah.
And I think Enfant terrible is like the terrible child that throws its toys out of its crib,
Yeah.
just so it can climb out. So he was climbing mountains.
Or keep his parents busy.
Keep his parents busy.
Keep them up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. No, I used it. That was beautiful. And I feel like as a father myself, I feel like it's a special thing. To play with your children. It's a joyous thing. I grew up in your home. And your home, I grew up in your studio. Your studio was also, as it's to be surrounded by creativity and art. It's a very special thing. It's also a normal thing when you grow up in that environment. It's not as you said, there's nothing to compare it to. It's just the way you were raised. That's the way you were born into. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it leads you into your own creativity. And it forces it on you. You have no choice.
Keren, from helping your father with his canvases and his painting, you became a painter yourself, and I believe you trained in the art school and then at Ravensbourne College in London, and then you took to painting. What was your experience of becoming a painter? Although I would say in a very different way from your father.
Mm-hmm. Let's see now. I was already, let's say, like, drawing and painting before I went to art school. I'd say that I was very hungry for an education in how to learn how to formally paint. But unfortunately, art schools and many institutions at that time in the 70s had been completely hijacked by existentialism. So talk about Enfant terrible, all the books and all the teachers had been thrown out of the buildings. And so the college prided itself on teaching absolutely nothing. They were very proud of that. They said that there's nothing to teach, rules and regulations are old and fuddy-duddy, and just express yourself. So, like a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old can't really express themselves, so I felt like that. And it took me quite a long time to recover from that experience, but my father had quite an intense training. He prided himself on a lot of anatomical knowledge. And so, thank God, I was able to benefit from all of that. Of course, I watched his process as well, which was always endlessly fascinating. But at the same time, it took me a long time to find my own visual voice, because he has a very, 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 very dominant visual language, and it's easy to fall into that way of expressing. So yeah, I think, and I'd say I'm still learning and I'm still trying to paint.
Actually, Souza painted for men and women to show them what angels look like. And he said the Renaissance artists painted for men and women to show them what angels look like, and he painted for the angels to show them what men and women look like. Now, in your work, one feels the intervention of divinity in normal everyday affairs.
Well, that's a compliment. Wow.
So, in a way, you are uh, carrying his legacy forward, but you are also showing very down to earth works which carry divinity in them. What do you feel about that?
I'm very grateful that you have discerned that. That is the quest. I think my father was a deeply spiritual individual. I think that is expressed in his profound disturbance by all the inequalities in the world, the haves and the have-nots. He considered himself a have-not. His Six Gentlemen of Our Times is an expression of that. And so, my mother was also very spiritual, and through those foundations, I found my own spiritual direction, and I've tried to channel that into my work. And I'm so glad and happy that somehow some of it is coming through. So, yeah.
So these questions lead to is a great segue into some of the other thoughts behind Souza. Some of them which you may or may not be in agreement. Firstly, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I know Yashodhara referred to the bell-sized years. I think when we were in past interviews and suddenly a light went off, and I would almost describe that as the Lizalot years. Of course, Souza was in London. There was a lot of cultural happenings at the same time. The importance of Picasso, literary people like Kafka, and so many other things. So one of the questions I had for you was that: is it Lizalot or is it London? What is the influence? Where do you put your mother's contribution in Souza's language of art, or his development, or the kind of works he painted? I mean, is it just was a thing of being Souza being overseas, or is it just Souza being with your mother? I mean, is there a how would you describe it? And this may be a contentious question. I mean, sorry to put you on the spot.
I mean, as you said the word mother, so I'm assuming that question's directed to me.
To you, yes.
It is.
I wouldn't direct it to. I think you're the friendliest of the bunch, so I'm only direct it to you. Maybe next to you, but starting with you.
Well, I have to quote the age-old adage, don't I? Because, like, it's being invited, that who is behind every successful man? Is it London or is it a woman? A woman. So there's the answer, kind of the simple answer, the easy answer to your question. And more kind of elaborate answer would be that, I mean, he himself was very, very excited and had a compulsion, obviously, to be in London. That being like the hub, and he needed to be there. So he made enormous sacrifices to be there. He arrived almost penniless. You can see there it's extraordinary that his priority. He has £15, he spends 10 of it on paint and just 5 on rent and food. And my mother was very, very rich in her interests, and of course my father was extremely rich in his, and so they must have had a very extraordinary collaboration, which is evident in this extraordinary explosion of creativity that my father was involved in. He had one after another sellout shows, at Gallery 1, like filled to capacity, you know, with like fresh works. I can't imagine, you know. I think he was excited. He was rebellious, but nevertheless he was very excited by Western culture. You know, he loved classical music. Of course, he loved classical Indian music, but sorry, I shouldn't say classical music in India. I should say Western classical music. Like he loved like Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Mendelssohn, and he played them constantly on his vinyls, on his records. All of these things, like you know, fed into his creativity, which is, and my mother was very definitely extraordinary, pivotal in that.
I think what we've discussed is that if you look at prior to 1954, the artwork that Souza produces is very different than, or begins to show a lot of differences.
Yeah,
It
it's
becomes
got
a much
more of an Indian flavor still. It's like the bridge, like from the India to the West, and then when he meets my mother, it kind of seems to kind of like take off, and he sheds more of the kind of constraints of like, I don't want to say constraints so much, although you know he had this shtick about the color academy, and I think that that's also the rebellion. He was rebelling against that kind of, you know, that way of like making stuff, like where paintings almost looked like in Indian paintings kind of looked almost like embroidery, and he was kind of, he wanted painting to be so much more. He knew that it was. I mean, he describes it as a reptile that he needs to attack. He has like very interesting metaphors and ways to talk about painting that are completely, you know, contrasting to the way that, you know, Indian painting had been made and what he'd grown up with.
okay. The second question usually has, maybe I'll wait for your answer. The second question would be on religion. Again, an elephant in the room. So we have seen Souza make a lot of artworks. You know, a lot of things that we call Catholicism. Uh, some of the things that may seem negative, like the Saint Sebastian, which is a Roman soldier who was impaled with arrows because he was converting people into a different religion, to you know, some of the self-flagellation or the concept of Satan, or you know, a lot of the other themes that he did, Pieta, Last Supper, etc., etc. Sometimes people say he was antagonistic on his religion, but at the same time, we can say that he was basically painting the imagery of his religion, and it's nothing negative. I mean, so what is he? Is he against his religion? I mean, he had friends with vicars. He loved the church and the grand things of it, and yet some of the paintings are seemingly negative. So was he against his religion, or was he just painting aspects of his religion?
You left it to me.
No, I thought you were being asked.
Well,
Sorry.
starting with you, sorry.
I'll start it off. I would say that, in fact, he was a Roman Catholic and he grew up in awe of the richness, the religiosity which he saw in churches in Goa, which he attended. But he also saw, and he was quite, insightful about this. He saw the corruption which existed uh, amongst the clergy, and he was against that. He didn't like their corrupt ways, which we know exist. And he felt that on the one hand they are preaching, these very pious sermons. On the other hand, in their private lives, you know, are they really so religious, so pure? They were the complete opposite.
You want to be practicing what they were preaching.
Yeah. So it was that which he was against, and in fact, his whole iconography started with painting, these devilish heads, and well, even Christ crucified is someone who is not an object of awe or compassion, but someone who's bleeding, who's scrawny, who's an object of almost revulsion. So this was not against religion or Catholicism even, but against hypocrisy and corruption. And if it had only gone on like that, perhaps he wouldn't have made a mark. He made a mark because he saw and he extended it to the power and corruption inherent in the upper classes. And that's where, six gentlemen of our times, works like those, began to be, accept, they began to be accepted and understood by a wide mass of people, and particularly in those war-ravaged times in London. So this is what I feel about it, and of course, he was also influenced by Francis Bacon and his depiction of religion. But there were works of Francis Bacon which he was influenced by, but it was never. Even Tayyab Mehta was influenced by Bacon. But one has got to hand it to these artists. They took it, they made it their own, they gave it their own iconography and their colors, and they were the making of modern Indian art.
Karen, I'll get your
Karen,
version.
would you like to say something?
What's the question?
Well, was he against religion, or was he just painting his the imagery of Catholicism within?
I think he was troubled and concerned and quite kind of cross about a lot of organized religion. But like again, I repeat, I believe he was a very, very spiritual person, and that's probably what aggravated his attitude towards organized religion, because I suppose in some ways he felt it wasn't necessary, because spirituality is like default. Like, what do we need all this organized religion for? And again, of course, like the hypocrisy, that's so true. He was repulsed by that, but at the same time, you see like the gorgeous priests, like vestments, and like the still lives with like the religious objects that are like encrusted with jewels that he wants to express. So he invests them with something else. They come from that organized religion, but he does something else with them, something otherworldly and exquisite, and can. So he's rebellious all the time. Like he can't help himself. He's just like rebellious.
I want to add one thing as well. So I always feel that, and it's a thing which I always start with whenever we have a Souza discussion, that one of his early reviews, in fact, Krishan Khanna, uncle, always tells this story that one Souza met him when he was still in London, and he asked him that there was this one piece on him which was done by a critic which signed as KK. So was it Karl Khandalwala? He said, no, it was actually me who did it. And in that, he was a little critical of Souza being too obsessed with his own self, or like he will use his art to sort of take out his personality. And I always say that that was his biggest asset, or the reason why he is the greatest among all equals, because he did make it so personal. So then whether it was relationships, whether it was religion, whether it was anything that he sort of thought of or felt strongly about, it was so emotional, and which is what makes it so timeless and so much across borders. Because whether it's one particular religion, and I don't think it was restricted to that. In fact, I've seen works on various religions that he's done. Like he do a Devi of certain sort. He's of course done Ganeshas. He's done, of course, a lot of Catholic this thing. So I think just as a human emotion, he would always have that love-hate relationship, whether it was, like I said, the relationships in his life, or it was religion, or it was his birthplace, or the various places where he stayed. I think he always did have a inner sort of fight with it, but at the same time, because he felt so strongly about it, it did have that effect in his artwork as well. So, yeah.
Actually, this would be good to ask you now about the East-West encounter. Were you, did you meet Souza at that time, or were you too young, or your mom obviously was there? And can you talk a little bit about it? What is an East-West encounter? What was the show about?
So the East-West encounter, of course, he did combine a lot of, again, when we talk about religion, it also had a lot of Greek mythology, and then he would also take these traditions from back home. Again, within back home is a relative term, but because he had so many homes. But yeah, he did sort of make that East meet West, and obviously it was because he again was of the view that. Imagery and strong imagery was a very much a part of Indian traditions, whether it was Khajuraho, whether it was. So he was one of the only artists who was free enough. And in fact, at that time, then it was an exhibition which was to be held in Bombay, but it was banned, and there were 8 works from the series. And at that time, all the 8 were purchased by the gallery, and after that, 2 of those were subsequently purchased by the NGMA. I think one of the works was on view as well. But yeah, my interaction with him, of course, was more as a kid, and that East-West encounter. I am not so familiar about the time of the show, but of course later, once I saw the works, one of course is right in the middle of a living room still, and one of my favorite, the pink nudes. But but yeah, like I said, with him, it was never like he went beyond that idea of everything being just storytelling. It was very much his thoughts, everything that he was feeling would sort of come out, and yeah, those are still some of the strongest, most erotic works of Indian art that there are.
Well, I'm going to step back into again a question that I'd planned earlier. I mean, certainly you alluded to it, the hypocrisy between the rich and the poor. And Souza's was a member of the Communist Party for a short time. I mean, he seemed to have a slightly leftist bent of mind. He in Bombay was supported by the Jewish emigres. I mean, Langhammer, Leiden, Schlesinger, who were essentially escapees from Europe and part of this, anti-fascist writers group, which was renamed to Progressive Writers Group. So there was a whole leftist, and London, of course, at that time was, in the grip of communism as well. So, do we know anything more about that? I mean, like Souza as a painter for the masses, like versus the Renaissance painting, which is basically made for some grand palace or something like that. Is there any connection that we can find? And I'll let this is an abstract question, so I'll let anybody answer. Maybe start with Solomon. So, what do you think? I mean, the slightly leftist, slightly more humane Souza. I mean, and that may go against the Enfant terrible moniker.
I mean, as Uday was saying, he was painting for himself, expressing himself. That was his own experience. He was painting his own experience. If he was the downtrodden, he was, which of course, communism, in its ideal.
I mean, he called himself a maggot in the book, right? So
he can have the biggest, the best.
He said, "I'm a maggot on a dung heap," or something.
Yes,
so
yes.
that was his thinking. So I mean, I'm just wondering how it affected his artwork, and I will put everybody on the spot for answers.
I mean, he was in a way a self-flagelator. He would force himself through things, but you see it in his work, and that's it adds that rawness to it. It's crucial. It wouldn't exist without it.
Oh yes.
Right, so I'm louder without it.
Yeah.
Hey, your turn. I don't have much more to say. I mean, yeah, that's
Does it have any effect on your work? I mean, or
Yeah,
Keren's
that's what
work?
I
I mean,
wanted to ask, like you, because we of course have seen it for a certain period of time, and still it's so impactful. With your like seeing it all the time or something, does it
for sure.
really?
Well, I grew up with his work surrounding me. That's how I did. I was another degree of separation. So I didn't know my grandfather as well as my mother did, and so these works, in a way, they were in. I think I was terrified by some of them. Some of them really they shocked me. They really did. Like some of them was scary stuff. But in an amazing way, in a very kind of enthralling and inspiring way as well. It definitely inspired me and definitely drew me into my own work. And I see how he did express himself, and that's something, art of course can be used to describe situations, that were beyond the person, but he would do so through his own lens. So he did it through his own experience and whatever that he was experiencing at that time.
But Solomon, your works are like large facades of buildings, and they're usually heads, and they're quite strong. They are also heads which speak out for themselves, and they cover facades from top to bottom. So, what makes you do that?
Well, generally, if I'm painting a portrait of somebody, a person, I want to tell their story. So if I'm doing Goa 2019, I was very blessed to be there. I did a large project, and we found stories of these untold stories of these, relatively, a lot of them are known, but a lot of them were kind of unknown characters from Goa's history, and stories are told through people. When we think back through history, we learn about the people in history, and each one of those people has a story to tell. And so when I focus on those, and most of my father's work isn't so distorted, such as my grandfather's work.
well, you've just begun. I mean, your career. I mean, there's
Yeah,
another 20 years. We will wait.
20. But no, I had 20 years. Yeah.
And, we'll see how it evolves. So,
Who knows what happens tomorrow?
That's right.
Tomorrow's not promised. But yeah, I mean, I like to obviously, you want to do justice to somebody, especially a lot of them are still living. So I couldn't paint them, with 10 eyes, and gnashing teeth. I couldn't do that. I don't think that.
But in the I mean, artists have even like Modigliani. I mean, you're painting a live person in front of you, and you completely distort the neck and the shape and form. It's been done since ages.
This is true. This is true. Yes. I'll slowly shift towards that. We'll see how it goes.
Just remember, we prodded you on that.
Yes.
I want to ask Keren, you made a painting called My Son
Solomon.
Expecting Solomon.
Expecting Solomon. What was it like having given birth to Solomon and having him around the house?
I was on this page.
What was it like? My life began. That's it. That's all I can say. I experienced intense joy and happiness, the likes of which I've never experienced before. I experienced the supreme intelligence, the living creator, the presence of the living creator was the birth of my spiritual journey. I had to give this little individual a name, and I had to give him a direction in life, where to point him, which direction to point him in, which direction to turn him away, or to take him away from. It's a huge, huge responsibility, and a big blessing to be a parent.
Keren, you live in London and Israel. What is it like shuttling between these two cities, countries.
And Goa. I mean, and Goa.
And Goa, and increasingly so. Yeah.
Actually, I think Karen may just be a resident of Goa. I mean,
I think so.
I think you are.
I
Yeah.
feel so. In fact, I mean, the real answer to your question would just be, I'm not really sure where I am right now. Like when I wake up, like I have to kind of remind myself where I went to bed the night before.
How much did you drink? That's the question.
Just not a question. Souza as a writer, obviously, we've tried to highlight the importance of Kafka. Again, somewhat of a leftist writer, writing about the downtrodden and the problems that can have with simple life, where somebody just wakes up and finds that he's a cockroach and the entire family goes after him. Of course, in that particular book, Kafka, there's a reference to Three Gentlemen, which I believe may have been the influence for in this exhibition. In fact, there is a Three Gentlemen work by Souza, and it may have influenced the Six Gentlemen that is more famous. He was also a writer. I mean, the Nirvana of a Maggot was how he achieved his first success. Not just the official writing, but all the letters that he wrote to you and others that show, somewhat a bit of a poetry. And like let's not have a stiff upper lip, as one of the letters said. And so he was a writer as well. I mean, any thoughts or feedback on that? I mean, he was a literary person. I mean, he was not just an artist. I mean, it was not just about the visual.
He was a published writer before he had his first exhibition. Actually, that's like something really quite extraordinary. Yeah, he was a very, very gifted writer. His prose was extraordinary.
Souza the writer.
Yeah, but that's why he put words and lines.
Which was, it's in fact the words the Nirvana of a Maggot is you can describe that as being Kafkaesque.
Yeah.
It is very much so. I mean, he was inspired by it. We'll take any questions from viewers, and I see Jatin Das walked in. I mean, Souza's friend. I'm wondering if you can ask him a question.
Or if you want to
Or
say
if he wants to say something, please come by. We can give him the mic, I guess. Are you please?
No. Souza was very short, but a tall man.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, that's great.
He was a dear friend of mine. And although he was much older than me, we knew each other from 1959. We met at the Columba Institute in Borden Road in London. And thereafter, innumerable times in London, Bombay, Delhi, America. And I remember Yashodhara wanted to meet Souza, and she had asked me to introduce him. Yeah, she's full of it. And there was something called a progressive artist group, and innumerable critics and curators referred to the progressive artist group. And Souza said there was no group. And he was studying in JJ much earlier than me. I studied also in JJ in Bombay. And he said he misbehaved with a teacher or something and he was thrown out. And then Souza, Raza, etc., they all had a meeting. At that time, Ultra Janan, the Progressive Writers Group. So they called it Progressive Artists Group. And next to Jahangir Gallery at the Artist Center. They never had a show of their own. And only took a photograph. No, individual artists have had many shows. But I'm saying Progressive Artist Group, and he said, and he laughed when I said, that a lot of people are writing about Progressive Artist Group. Various people here might have different information, but this is from the horse's mouth. And he did portrait sketch of mine in 1965, and innumerable other portraits through decades after that. And I did many of is, and the young lady I met in London many years ago, and Souza's many families, and was a fantastic fellow. I remember he was staying at Churchgate for another hotel, and he would spread the canvas on the floor and paint. Let me tell you something about Dhoomimal Gallery.
Hope it's good.
Yeah?
Hope it'll be good. I mean.
No, he was staying at the hotel, what is this?
Ashok
This outside one of place, not Ashoka.
Center point. Center point.
No. This which has become Chinese, there's a Chinese name to it.
Marina.
No, not Marina.
Yatri Nivas, no, it was called that.
Yatri Nivas. No, which has become Chinese.
Yeah.
Right. That hotel, and I came and he looked at me like this, above his spectacles, and said, "Don't worry, these are all rubbish I'm doing. They want 50 paintings of mine. They give me 50,000 between breakfast and lunch, and they will sell them at 50,000." So innumerable anecdotes like this. My son was studying in NID in Ahmedabad. When he came, he offered him 10, 15 drawings. He said, "Give some to your girlfriend, some to your friends." He said, "Hey, Souza uncle, I need only one sketch of yours." You know? So he was a fantastically generous fellow. I remember once, many years ago, in the 60s, and we were at the gallery Emold, and Gandhi, they were standing there, and he was with Chambedi, and this gallery fellow was asking him for a show. So he didn't reply to him for 3 times. Then he said, "I will get a young lady from the street and tell her to look after my show. Why should I show here?" You know? Like this. Innumerable anecdotes like this. He used to write long letters to me and to everybody else, I suppose, and very clear handwriting, you know. And then he would write back, "The third line that I wrote in the previous letter is not correct." Things like that. You see, let me tell you something else altogether. Kishan Khanna and Ram Kumar were having a show 50 years ago in Bombay. And somebody came to buy a painting of Kishan. So Kishan said, "If you buy a Ram Kumar, I'll sell you one." You know, the point is, all these artists,
Community.
you know, in 1974, she was having a show in London, what is that, 134? What was it?
38.
The gallery.
38 Baker Street?
Yeah, no, that was
138, was it?
Yeah. What's it? No, his ex-wife.
Yeah, Maria.
Yeah. And I was visiting, and I telephoned, so he wasn't there. And then when he came back, he telephoned me. He said, "Shall I come and fetch you?" I said, "No, I'll come." When I came, and there's a kitchen in the basement, he brought a plate with sausages, fried egg, toast, etc. for me to eat. And everywhere, when you have a show, many people invite you. So he was having a show. So he told everybody, unless a great artist and a dear friend of mine is in town, if you invite him, then only I'll come. So he was a very large-hearted, not only him, the artists of the generation all over the country, all over the world, were very affectionate, very kind. You know, many artists all over the world, including here, they will first spend their money to buy art material. Then the rest they will spend it with their friends for drink and food and etc. There is a sea change in the whole thing. And I just said there were innumerable programs this evening that I came rushing purely, and I'm a little late. But many other people have mentioned.
Actually, one last, some of your works can be described as temple dances, or maybe look somewhat similar. And Souza obviously had a big interest in temple dances. He's done from like 1949 to towards the end of his career. Can you give us any more perspective as why you're in London, you're all over the world, yet temple dances is a huge theme.
Souza was a fantastic fellow. Somebody says, "I want this," he said, "No, this is rubbish." You know, his own work, you would say. This is by Jatin's work. You know, like as I said, Dhoomimal, we are acquiring 50 works that morning, and he said they will sell
That price can't be right though. So I don't think he quoted the right price.
50 works at
No,
1,000 each.
these are his
Could be at
words.
that time, right?
Yeah, in 90s possible.
This is 78 or something.
That's definitely possible.
Yeah, no, but these are actual, believe it or not, but this is true. But beautiful time. He's a lovely fellow. And many of them, many of them.
Yeah, absolutely,
Many of them, all the
absolutely.
artists. All the artists.
Actually, so we also have we have Nisar here as well, and I love to put him on the spot because he was already made a comment that when Souza went to London, he stayed with Al-Qazi, and I was wondering if you could add any more perspective to the study of Souza.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure. Well, I will still get the answer. So
Yeah. So, Yashodhara, it would be lovely to know when Souza left India, goes to London, and then decides, I guess, after some time to settle down there. Why do you think he never came back to India? Why was it that he decided to stay abroad? We know that other artists like Raza also stayed on in France, etc. What do you think is the reason? And do you think that Souza was, maybe this is for you, is that, was he happy then? What was his relationship back with India? You know, his relationship to an absolutely foreign audience. How was his work received over there? After all, it had its roots in India. It had its roots in a kind of Indian Catholicism. So it may not have been, immediately grabbing the public of the day. Though, of course, we have heard so many stories of the wonderful sell-out exhibitions that he had in Gallery 1. But then later on, was it a kind of a troubled relationship with India? What was his thoughts on India?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. And it wasn't just the sellout shows, he was like selected to represent Great Britain, Commonwealth Institute, the Queen came, there's that fabulous photograph of him. There's even the photographs that Edgar took of him before that meeting, where he's in his dapper suit in front of his work, like preparing beforehand, like a few hours before. Whatever, he was like an ambassador. He was an ambassador for India. India was his love, and he never ever lost sight of that. It never dimmed in his heart, ever. And of course, he left his family behind. He left his beloved mother, and he would return frequently. He was part of that East-West camp thing, and he jumped over many times. And I remember when I was a very small child, he didn't have a beard, and then suddenly he did have one because he'd gone to India, and I don't know, he'd either forgotten his shaver, or it didn't work, or there wasn't any electricity, or something. But nevertheless, he came back with this big, and it stayed. Yeah, sorry?
It's a good look.
Yeah, it's a good look, yeah. It's also convenient, I think. And yes, it's true, like when he went to Manhattan, when he moved to New York, he could have moved to India. But he had, I think he really was like invested in this bridge he was making between East and West. And I think that's, I don't know if that other people probably have like something to say about that. It's very interesting.
I think also the kind of art probably that he always did, probably India. So, and I do feel it's actually true for a lot of these artists, whether it's Souza, it's Raza, it's Hussain. Once they've mastered their sort of journey, they have felt even more of a longing back for their country, and I think they've made more of an effort to come back. But in those times, I think just the acceptability for modern art in India, like I remember even as late as the 1980s, and Ashok Bajpai ji always has this story to tell that though like Mr. Gyani Zail Singh under Mrs. Gandhi's leadership had visited Bharat Bhavan, and he would still be asking questions for a Abbadas painting or something that no, इसका मतलब क्या है यार, मतलब कुछ अच्छा तो लगना चाहिए, कुछ खेल खलियान हो या no, like some of those topics. But so I think a lot of these artists at that time were so much more accepted or so much more and towards the later halves of their careers, once they'd been established, I think they did find that longing in coming back to their own country. But I think they did, and probably because they did so much of travel and created so much of awareness the world over, that Indian art today at least is sort of getting its right due.
He was always connected to Indian art. I think there's a letter in Dhoomimal archives, I remember, where he wrote, I'm not sure, to Swaminathan or wrote about Swaminathan, saying that let Swaminathan decide whether he wants to be an art critic or he wants to be an artist. He can't be both. And
I think that was also because of the difference of opinions on Picasso, for example, because Swaminathan did not think very highly of Picasso, and Souza, of course, did think very high of Picasso. So they always
the
had.
point is that he was keeping a check on what's happening.
Yes, he was
and
very much connected. And he always wanted these institutions, like whether it was Bharat Bhavan or it was whether what he thought of them was another matter, but he was always very keen that his work should be represented at these national institutions, or even when we did the Kala Mela in 1986 and a lot of senior artists were not willing to participate, he was more than willing to sort of show his art and interact with the younger students, keep autographing sketches for them. So I think he always did have that India connect, and it was important to him to be represented here. But yeah, I guess that acceptability and what he got internationally was, of course, something which.
But I think, Uday, you're right in this sense too, that at that point of time, to Indian modern Indian art was yet to gain the acceptance which it did later on. So it was important to have it viewed and accepted internationally. And in doing so, they became ambassadors of the art, which later grew in India as well. But all this said, I would also say that for Souza, his women, he would have come back, then he met someone, then he would have come back, he met someone else. He didn't want to go, he didn't go to the US because of Barbara. He went because Barbara he met in London and she didn't want to go to New York. But the trouble was, he felt that his work was selling more there and that he would go. And actually, it was a false move. Because at that time in the US, figurative art was not popular and he didn't gain the acceptance which he had in UK and Europe.
Yeah.
Almost, he had a patron.
He had a patron, but that didn't work out. I mean,
He was given an apartment and a gallery, but the gallery didn't.
he
The
never
apartment
adopted.
did.
He never adopted like abstraction. You're sitting in 60s US
closest he
beginnings
got
of
to-
Western abstraction. I mean,
The closest he got to a field painting was like that style there with the yellow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he was there. He was expressing like how you feel like when you're in New York and you look at like the scale of the buildings, and he made those in New York, and they used
You
spray
makes you feel
paint.
small.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask Aaron,
yeah.
when he left and went to the US, did he keep in touch with you? And was he always sort of talking about your work and
Totally got like letters galore. I don't even understand. And he wrote the amount of letters. It's like Van Gogh, the postman came 3 times a day to collect Van Gogh's letters. And Dad had to like walk to the letterbox, but he did, and it's quite extraordinary. He fired off letters to the Pope, to the President of America. Nothing stopped him. And so when he wasn't writing letters, he was painting, and we all know what an extraordinary body of work he left. So it's absolutely mind-blowing.
so a section of the
Did that answer the question, or do you have more comments to add to that?
So a section.
The question, to the answer. Yeah, yes, there are lot of surmises, but Indian modernism was always looked at, what we call Indian modernism, was looked at by the West and for a long time as derivative of the West. And that I think enraged Souza tremendously to be called derivative.
Yeah.
And that we are making our own modernism. And so that East-West encounter, which is also part of a seminar, which Nissim Ezekiel and who's the other woman with him, who were moderating that seminar where foreign artists had come to India and a whole lot of our artists, including Souza, was there. There was full-on debate about Indian modernism not being derivative. And Souza was the most vociferous of the lot, fighting for that. Because it was very difficult for Indian art to be accepted. And even till today, whatever strides we may have made abroad, it is not universally understood and accepted. And Westerners do tend to look at Indian art as something, an offshoot of Western modernism. But that.
There is a section of the exhibition on letters that he wrote to the family, and of course, one thing that comes out, he was a doting father for sure. We've also transcribed some voice messages that he left to Keren, which is on the television screen. You can read the text, and again, goes to show he was absolutely a doting father. So we will.
Do you also have some personal memories of meeting him with?
But I'll just tell you a quick story since you asked me about it. And it is in my book, I've written a biography on my father, and one of the chapters. So my father told me, and I think is also mentioned to Yashodhara, he gave a very interesting interview on Souza and himself to Yashodhara, which we have printed in an art heritage publication called Ibrahim Al-Qazi Directing Art. So Yashodhara has got a wonderful interview with Al-Qazi, which he mainly talks about his relationship with Souza in the early days. So it's very humorous,
Yes.
it's full of wit,
I've seen
and about how they had no money, they were penniless, and in London, etc. My father was a Radha at that time. So my father tells a story that just before he got the ship to go to England to study, my father met Maria and Souza, who had just got married, and they came over to the house. And he said, listen, Souza, I'm going off to London. I'm taking Nissim Ezekiel with me. And I think we should all go to London together. We are young people, and my father knew Souza from when he was at JJ. And why don't we go and absorb, Western modernism altogether? All of us would be a wonderful group. And you and Maria must come. So anyway, my father and Nissim all went off. And in 48, and later in 48, Maria and Souza arrived. But Souza first came without Maria, and the sequence in my chapter in my book is about how Souza started living with my parents, who had got a very tiny basement apartment in London, and which we could barely move around in. But friends kept popping in from India, Souza being one of them. So Souza stayed with them, and then I have a humorous story about Souza, as Jatin has just told us how generous he was. He generously invited his friends over to have a dinner at the Al-Qazi's house. So my mother got all hot and bothered and said, Souza, I have nothing to cook, we have no money. You've invited people for dinner. But Souza said, don't worry, Roshan, it's fine, it's fine. And so she cooked up a meal, and so that's the entire description of that evening, the meal, who were the people who came over, and Souza talking a lot about the show he had just had, the progressive show in Bombay, which had opened, all very excited, also talking about that going to Delhi, attending the show over here, seeing all the wonderful sculpture, etc. at Rashtrapati Bhavan. So it's all in that particular chapter. It's in the same chapter that my father was was wonderful, interested in theatre, was also a painter. So he's painting. And in that same chapter, Souza sees Al-Qazi's new drawings and new artworks, and he starts talking about them. And he's very excited about the kind of work that Al-Qazi is turning out, not just as an actor, but even as an artist. So it's all in that chapter. So there are many chapters where Souza comes in and out, which I have referred to.
Lizelot was also a graduate of RADA. I wonder if there's any connection.
I beg your pardon?
Karen's mother was
Yes.
also a graduate from RADA.
Yes.
So I wonder.
My father was there from 48. I was born in 47. They dumped me with my grandmother, and my parents ran off to study further in England. You know, they were very young. They were a very young couple, and I was born when my father was just 22. So I don't know when your mother was there.
Yeah, I don't either. Shamefully, I don't know either.
Oh, you don't.
Yeah, find
My
out.
father was there till 51.
It
He
might,
was there till 51.
might be.
From 48
Might be,
to
and
51.
it might be a
So another avenue opens up for research.
I think there's also one more point, just on a general this thing, and whenever I hear these inspiring stories of these older times, and they were like, I mean, that day we were hearing Ram Kumar ji that when he was in Paris, he would actually deliberately avoid a bakery because that smelled so good and he could afford to eat there, that he would actually. But what I was coming to is that today we hear so many artists or galleries or dealers where we say that this is not selling, or how do we make it big in art. But at that time, this was never the conversation. They were in it because they loved it so much. They were so passionate about it. They never thought that like 3 generations later we'll be selling a single artwork for 100 crores, or like those sort of stories. They just loved, or they were so passionate about it, whether it was the dealers like my grandparents or parents, or like Mr. Al-Qazi, or there are fair examples of this, and or even the artists. For them, it was just about the whole ecosystem, and I think even today our generation could really learn from it, that whatever the values are and whatever the commerce part of it plays, but I think if you want to be an artist, or if you want to be part of the art circuit, you just want to be part of it. It doesn't really need to be related to the commerce bit.
I think you need to walk around with a big sketchbook. You look at the painting over there. That's an extraordinary example of like a young man. He must have been all of like 20 max when he painted that.
Absolutely.
And like, he probably painted a few like on that afternoon. Knowing how fast he worked.
He was.
He was a tornado. His maximum. I heard that he once painted 14 paintings in a day. And that, like what equipment? Like what did he do that morning? Like he knew he was going to go out and paint. What did he do? He packed a bag, he took that, and like along with a sketchbook. And that's something that we can all do.
But I believe he didn't do any prior sketches. He just painted it.
Exactly, he would have painted that on the spot.
Without any pre-drawing.
Sure, yeah.
Mom says she's seen him do a full, like a 6 feet landscape with a paint tube. Like he would just paint the whole landscape with
the tube.
Yeah, with just the
Dispense
tube of
with
paint.
the brush.
Yes.
Yeah, there's the really funny story about like when he would draw or paint outside. Oh, the really funny story that when he would paint outside, it might have been when he was doing that one, and then a crowd would form around him, and he could hear them saying to each other, like one saying to the other, "Don't worry, he will take it home and make it better."
That is Karen's
I just think that's
of
hilarious.
Souza's own accent. So.
But it's just such a funny thing. Like, don't worry.
Yeah.
One person in the crowd is reassuring the other person next to him.
That you'll get better.
It's just so funny.
That actually reminds me of Solomon. I think he was here 5 days ago, and we had an empty white space gallery.
Yes.
So we got say,
He's got a 30 feet wall waiting for him.
We get to prime it.
Yeah.
Closing comments. We'll start with you, Solomon.
It's truly an honor to be here tonight, and I guys have done an incredible job.
Here,
Really,
here.
yeah, really. Like as you said, I was here a few days ago, and there's nothing here. This is.
It was all planned out. There's nothing that's been on. Everything was planned.
Yeah, but only he did the plan.
Only so. I'm sure there was also panicking, saying what's happening. But it was everything's the entire. So I'll just use this for 2 seconds to thank my team. We have Harsha and Harpreet. The entire walls were designed, planned, and then printed. So there's nothing in research, of course, research. There's nothing in this exhibition that wasn't ready till when we came here. And it was an arduous task. It was a long task. It was an arduous task. But so
it's like an observer watching an artist create something, and you see, and you're seeing the sketch, the underlayer, and you can't tell what it's going to be. You can't tell, what kind of masterpiece is going to come from that simple, the beginning, the first lines. That's what I'm seeing the first lines, and here I'm seeing the full painting of the masterpiece. So well done to you. Thank you, Uday, for hosting us. Really fantastic. Yashodhara as well. Thank you for joining us.
a closing comment by you.
Closing comments.
Well, for me personally, it's been good to know all these things about Souza's family, from his daughter, his grandson, and of course Indrajit and Uday, because it paints, up to now we know about Souza, what he did, his life, but this brings out the full man, the man in all his dimensions, and it enriches our viewing of his art. So it's been a great pleasure, and to have all of you here. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Huge gratitude goes out to Uday and Indrajit and his extraordinary team, and of course Uday's extraordinary team. It's quite an achievement, and I feel like it's like a beacon towards the future. I feel like my father would be extraordinarily happy and proud, and just really happy that it's a great turnout, and thank you all for coming. Let the show go on, and we'll all meet again soon. The next chapters.
Yeah, I agree that what Yashodhara said also, that of course we all have been impacted so much by Souza's works always, but a fresh-hand interaction with the family and is really refreshing, and I think it does bring out a fresh perspective. Also, of course, if some of you don't know, we are currently in his 100th year, which is why we did do one exhibition which Yashodhara curated of course, a lot more works from our collection earlier in 2024. But this now pretty much sort of brings the full circle, and the year is going to end. 12th April is his birthday, so I'm sure we'll have some celebration at that time as well. But yeah, I think he is, like I said, his works are timeless. He's quite timeless in terms of his works talking about raw emotions and human emotions. My interactions with him, like sometimes now I really wish that, having grown up, that the conversations would have been really fun from what I know from his humor. Or like I still remember as a 16-year-old, he actually was over home and he wanted to watch this one movie of this actress called Kajol, who he thought was very good looking. And I was like, I don't think she's that good looking. And he's like, when you get to my age, when you get to my age, you will find them attractive. No, so I'm just saying, like, even with, yeah, like he always, yeah, so he always had that humor.
We will edit this section out.
Very, like he probably did have that presence mind and humor always. So I do think we need more people like that even today, where everything is so sort of correct and there's so much of double standards in some way. I do feel a personality like Souza, or at least his works, can really teach us, go beyond that. And again, yeah, thank you all for coming, Mr. Allana, Jatin uncle, and yeah, we'll do a quick lamp lighting to inaugurate the exhibition as well.
Yeah, we'll have a walkthrough after this. I'll just take 10 seconds to close from my side. Well, thank you, Uday.
Everyone to join for drinks and snacks.
Yeah, and so after this, we'll have walkthrough and drinks and snacks, vernissage on the second floor. We made it somehow, Karen, the 100th-year exhibition with the family. So this has been a while in the making. On the second floor, we have artworks by Keren, we have artworks by Solomon, and we have artworks by Ruben. And we also have digital artworks, non-fungible tokens on the blockchain, a project that we have done with Keren. And so there's a screen that shows the various artworks that we have tokenized. These are what's called real-world assets. So, as we move into technology, these are some of the things that excite us. But anyway, thank you all for coming. And one thing that has become very clear is that there'll be more research and there's more aspects. And hopefully we're able to appreciate and learn more about the artist we love, which is Souza. So, and what a legacy he leaves behind. And thanks to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.